Hello, this is me, Erika Stahl von Holstein.
And this is Luca de Biase.
Welcome to Reimagine Talks, the podcast to challenge the way we think.
Today we are here to reimagine ethics with Professor Jeroen van der Hoven. Jeroen is University Professor of Ethics and Technology at Delft University of Technology and Editor-in-Chief of Ethics and Information Technology. He is currently Scientific Director of the Delft Digital Ethics Center. He is also a permanent member of the European Group on Ethics to the President of the European Commission.
Jeroen, thank you very much for joining us here today to talk about some of these issues that are currently dominating our headlines. But before diving into some of the more controversial topics of today, maybe we should start at the beginning. And I'd like to ask you, what do we mean by ethics and why is it important?
Well, ethics is usually defined as the reflection and the study of moral phenomena, the way people handle in their daily practice, in their daily lives, ethical issues pertaining to good and bad, right and wrong. So they confront all kinds of dilemmas and difficult questions, disagreements, and they talk about it and they try to resolve them. So ethics is a kind of a reflection and systematic study of those moral phenomena. So it's important to make that kind of level distinction. It's kind of a meta activity that deals with issues that everyone confronts in daily life pertaining to good and bad, and right and wrong. And it's something that we do all the time, although we are not constantly aware of it, but we do more of it than we think. And so usually, to take that a little bit further, in philosophy, the distinction is made between you could do that study and that reflection in a descriptive way. So like anthropologists or sociologists do it. You just describe the way people do that in a systematic and orderly way. Or you could take a normative point of view and try to come up with theories that provide you with handles or guidelines to answer those difficult questions. Or you could even take it one meta step further up and discuss the meaning of terms like justice or fairness or dignity, and so then you get into fairly abstract and analytical philosophy about the meaning of those terms. That's what we call meta-ethics. And then there is finally this practical or applied ethics, where you try to apply these normative ethical theories. It's good to remind ourselves that there is no unique single correct answer to these issues, and that there are limits to the precision that we can achieve. Being reminded of Aristotle's idea that we shouldn't strive after a level of precision that the subject matter doesn't allow us to achieve. So it is in and by itself a hard subject matter, and still a lot of controversy about these issues. The other thing to say about ethics is that it is, of course, as you already kind of alluded to in your introduction, it's very popular. Everyone is doing ethics, and it requires a very subtle balancing act between, for example, subjective and objective points of view, partial and impartial points of view, reason and emotion, self-interest and the interests of others. So that is also something that needs to be taken on board. A general characterization of this moral phenomena is usually, there's a lot of agreement about that it's to do with restraint, with self-imposed constraints on the pursuit of your own goals, your own interests, or the interests of your group. And trying to conceive of the interests and needs of others and rights of others, and have them work in your decision making as constraints on the way what you pursue, what you want to achieve.
It seems that we really know more ethics is going to be important for our society, but we also think that it can be important to reimagine ethics for dealing with the big challenges that the world is facing and the different cultures that have to face it. So do you think that we need to reimagine ethics and that something went wrong with the ethics that we used to use?
Yeah, I think it is about time to do that. We cannot solve the problems that we're confronted with by the ethics that we already have developed over thousands of years, and that have a long history, 2,500 years before we go back to the times of ancient Greece and Socrates and Plato and Aristotle I already mentioned. There's a lot of very deep insights that are still very relevant today. So it's not just a matter of throw that all overboard. But we need to configure it in a different way. And therefore we have to look at what this time and age requires. So for example, look at a number of problems and then see what is required to deal with those problems of the present day and age. So first and foremost, I think it is very important to give ethics and considerations of value, moral considerations, their proper place. Right? Often we are so, involved in the complexities of daily life and of the pursuit of our own interest. For example, think only of the values that the market economy kind of imposes upon us. It's all about money. It's about making our businesses run, economic parameters. And then we forget, we know that we forget about, the interests of others because we're so involved in the pursuit of our own interests. So greed is good. We know that dictum. But then if that's your motto in life, then you will not take into consideration the interests of others. So, and then there are the complexities. We have made societies very complex, institutionally, technologically, in all respects, so that it's very, very easy to hide and to be, what we have called in some publications a moral fog. You lost the true north, and it's very complex. You can always say, "Oh, it's so complex. I fail to understand and to have a good grasp of matters." And so it's the complexity and the, let's say, the values that are imposed upon us by these kind of systems have sometimes perverse effects. So that is one thing that we need to take into account. So give ethics its proper place, understand what it's about, what it requires of us, and try to weave that into our institutions and procedures and the way we look at things. The other thing is that our ethics originates from a time where we were basically at the fireplace. So, and now we're confronted with climate change, right? So we have to move the ethics that was developed to deal with, not punching Luca on the nose. And so there's a kind of a space-time contiguity and a very clear causal nexus and two actors being present and clear effects that I can already see what the effects are of my punching you. Now we have to scale up and we have to see that we may be dealing with, the terrible consequences of omissions, not so much of actions. People we don't know, it's not Luca, but it's future generations, people do not even exist in remote corners of the world. And the way we are connected to those effects is via very difficult and hard to grasp causal connections. So we from the fireplace where everything is very close, we have a unity of time, place, and action and agents, and we have to now scale up our ethics to deal with problems that are a completely different nature. And while we do that, we also have to do a little bit of the balancing act that I referred to in my introduction. Because, of course, my project, my life, my interests, my family, the people who are close to me and dear to me count for something. But in order to deal with those kind of the bigger global issues, I have to be able to relativize those at the same time, but not too much, because otherwise the meaning of my life would disappear or be undermined. So that's the second one. So it's the complexity that we need to deal with, and the bad faith that comes with it, just going for money or for short-term self-interests, or finding all kinds of excuses because it's way too complicated. Then the scaling up thing. Then the speed is another one, right? So we're not used to dealing with things that have such an incredible speed. We'll later on talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. Well, that is a matter of 2 years, and things that have been produced or insights that have been formulated 6 months ago already seem very much outdated. So we have to anticipate, and we have to use all the time we can get, and therefore, our ethics needs to be a little bit anticipatory. The other thing is that we have to overcome this abstraction concreteness problem. So the application of our wonderful ethical ideas, and we have ethical theories and ideas about justice and fairness and democracy. But I can, give you 50 different definitions of fairness or democracy or justice, or so which one do we use, and how do we go about the application of those very abstract ideas? How do we turn that into technologies that suit us, into institutions that carry out our ideals and our principles? So that is another very important problem. So the design application issue, and this brings us to a very important thing that I really want to highlight, and the audience and the listeners to think about, and it's called the ethics by design, or this designing for your values. It's no longer good enough to say, oh, I'm a big fan of democracy. Now we will have to, on a daily basis, try to explicate and make very precise what we want our institutions and our technologies to be like in order to serve whatever kind of democracy we think is worthwhile wanting. So the complexity needs to be dealt with, the speed of things needs to be dealt with, the scale of things needs to be dealt with, and the gap between very abstract theories and principles and concepts to the application and the embedding and the incorporation of our ethics into the things that we make on a day-to-day basis. So these are, huge challenges, and we really need to, recalibrate and rethink our ethics. A good example of that is very important, and I will come back on a little bit later, is responsibility. So we use that idea, responsibility, in a very, traditional sense. But we forget that the world has become extremely complex and complicated and dynamic. And I've used the analogy with trying to repair a Swiss precision watch with a hammer. Our tools, or also our conceptual tools, are not suited for the task at hand. So we need a much finer grained vocabulary of responsibilities that allows us to divvy up responsibilities and tasks in very complex, dynamic data or model or AI systems, as the European Commission now talks about, like ecosystem data and models, which is a good way of conceptualizing it. But then it also requires us to reconceptualize our ethical vocabulary and instruments. And that is work that is underway. That's work that we're carrying out with our colleagues throughout Europe. So that's a daunting task.
That's fascinating. And in a previous episode of Reimagine Talks, Manuel Castells mentioned that, the internet has been designed for freedom. However, we forget sometimes that freedom does not mean good. Freedom is a different thing. And I think what we're talking about here today is really about this: how do we turn it to the good? And this is a daunting task. And I know that you have been part, together with the other members of the European Group of Ethics, in publishing an opinion that's looked precisely at democracy in a digital society, and how do we transform this society that now has moved also online into a good society and not only a free society. What do you think are the biggest opportunities and challenges in that transformation?
Yeah, it's a very important topic. Also, of course, with European elections coming up for the so Brussels is very much in a kind of this mood of let's give democracy a shot in the arm, basically, and that is really what is needed. Because on the one hand, there are these huge threats, and we know them. I mean, we've studied them now for a couple of years. We've seen election after election in the member states and in different parts of the world where social media and the new technologies are used to undermine democracy and all the instruments and the institutions that we've put in place and that are hard won, basically. That has taken a lot of effort. And now we have to defend ourselves and democracy against those attacks. So misinformation, disinformation, we know that, filter bubbles, polarization, balkanization, whatever. It's a very, and it's not easy to get a good handle, good grasp on it. But that's one part of it. The other part is that it is not just about elections. It's not just about the technical, formal instruments or content of a democracy. Very important, of course, but it is more. It's like it's also paying attention to the civility of the discourse of a public debate. What does a decent public sphere look like in which can carry and support a rich and enlightening debate among citizens, and that is free for all and accessible to all, and that obeys certain rules. So that's and in order to achieve that is not only a defensive task that is required of us, but it's also an offensive task, and that I think is something that is on our plate right now. So while carrying out the defensive work on democracy and trying to salvage it and save it and fence it. The other one is to engage in all kinds of experiments and use the technology to support NGOs, citizens, civil society at large that wants to experiment with new forms of democracy. And the technology is wonderful for that. In the same way it can be a very kind of a big threat, it can also be a big opportunity for us. And therefore, I would like to see much more of those democratic experiments where we do what I just sketched, so designing for democracy. So come up with ideas of what we think is like representation, involvement, inclusion, voice, exit, all of these, very participation, all of these very important parameters or functionalities of democracy, and then try to embed them in platforms or in digital technologies, and also validate, and experiment and see whether that works or not. So that is John Dewey, the pragmatist philosopher, who said, the democracy is something that we need to experiment with every day. We need to reinvent it every day in light of the new circumstances. And that requires efforts by all, and therefore it's upon politicians and government, it is upon them to facilitate that and to make that possible. So that so it comes like in philosophy in general, it has usually a defensive part, but also in kind of a constructive part.
Well, you just shown us some of the biggest challenges in bringing ethics from ideal to reality, but in reality now we live together with this big discourse, big discussion about artificial intelligence. You already mentioned that, how this is changing the context in which you work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so AI, it's clear that that's one of the big challenges, technological challenges, societal challenges. I would like to introduce the idea that Europe has promoted in the last decade under the previous, but also under the present framework program of the European Commission. And I think the Commission should be commended for the fact that they highlighted what they call responsible innovation. So So responsible innovation is the responsible development and use and implementation of a new technology. And so what does it mean? Let us just briefly unpack that. First of all, a technology should be geared towards and used to solve a really important and relevant moral problem. Think of a societal problem. So think about energy transition, circular economy, in mobility and transport, migration, and we know what the list of those problems are that we urgently need to solve: climate change. Look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, for example. We previously talked about the Millennium Goals, but we know there's a huge set of problems, and they need to be addressed urgently. So several members of the family of the UN have already said this AI should be geared towards solving those problems, those societal problems. And we can use some help, as I already said. So responsible innovation is not about, I have thought about something new. I have a new functionality. That's great. But that's not per se good, right? That requires an independent argument of why that is good. And so the first question is, it's innovative, but is it good? Will it really help us to solve one of the big problems that we're confronted with in this 21st century? So that's the first point. The second one, aspect of that, of responsible innovation, is doesn't it create new problems that are even worse or as bad as the problem we're trying to solve? Or does it exacerbate existing problems? And a very important aspect is, will it allow us to proceed in a way that will allow us to take our responsibilities, that all relevant actors, the users, the consumers, the people who produce it, the people who make money of it, will be able to act responsibly? So that is also, as I alluded to before, that is becoming a design issue, right? We cannot just assume that everyone will be able to take responsibility, that will act around that new technology and its applications in a responsible fashion. That will be something that we will have to be explicitly designed for. The other thing is that so it becomes a moral endeavor. Innovation is not like, yippee, we've found something new and it will make us all rich very soon. No, it is new functionalities, wonderful new engineering capabilities that will allow us to reach solutions to our common problems, urgent problems, sooner rather than later, and in a responsible fashion. If you do that, if you proceed in this way, you will find that you often will be able to reconcile value conflicts by having them as requirements on the table. Like, for example, Europe has been big on privacy respecting technologies, right? Why do you think that we were so innovative with privacy respecting technologies? Well, because we thought privacy and data protection were very important, and we didn't want to compromise on them. But at the same time, we wanted to use the functionality and the wonderful capabilities that IT and digital technologies could offer. So you see, you have a conflict. On the one hand, you want to move forwards and use it for all kinds of good. And on the other hand, you don't want to compromise on privacy. Now, privacy enhancing technologies, privacy by design, is the way forward. Privacy by design is an innovation that will allow you to have your cake and eat it, to do two things at the same time that you don't want to compromise on, you don't want to renege on. So that's an example that we can use. It's responsibility, safety, security by design, where you try to satisfy as much of your values and your responsibilities in one fell swoop by thinking of something new. So that is, I think, the wonderful, the emergent, let's say, emergent property of this take on innovation that turns innovation into a moral concept. It's not just a frivolous thing, a wonderful. It's at the same time, of course, a nice thing, and it's exciting. It can make us, indeed, it bring us some profits and some benefits economically and financially, but don't forget, this is basically a moral endeavor. And I think that's a very interesting, that applies. Now, this is a long introduction to come to your question back. And this needs to be applied to AI as well, right? So we have to study and look for the opportunities of how AI can help us to solve those. This is AI for good. How can it help us to solve those societal problems while at the same time serving those moral values and not compromise on them? That will push us to explore those frontiers where really interesting innovations are. And really interesting, I mean that they expand the set of moral obligations that we can satisfy. That's what is upon us.
That is fascinating. And I think, if I understand you correctly, you feel that the age of move fast and break things is over. This is not the time to do that anymore. We need to start becoming more responsible about how we deal with these enormously powerful innovations and technologies. And one of the questions that I had, now that we're coming towards the end of the interview, I'd love to continue this discussion for hours, but that is, we obviously need to see a huge shift in how we think about innovation, how we think about developing this online world that we're now inhabiting and that is guiding us. There's been a lot of negative, obviously, press recently saying that it's these new technologies that are ending democracy, that are pushing us all, fragmenting our society. And I like that you're still optimistic that there is a way out of this, that if we change the way we are doing things, this could also be this enormous positive force towards democracy, towards freedom, and towards all these values that we want to do. As a last concept, what would your last advice be? And do you think that we need a broader change in narrative about how we think about this to help us revolutionize the way we interact with these new technologies and this new innovation?
Well, the first thing I already mentioned that when we started about ethics and what is going wrong and what we should do to reimagine ethics. And I think one of the first things to do now and in the near future is to call a spade a spade. We have to have the courage to call ethical issues and morality, give its proper place. And for a long time, we have been kind of moving around that a little bit, so it's for the faint-hearted, and that morality and ethics, well, that's not really, that should have a really important place in our education and in training of engineers and people who do business administration. So it's no longer, there should be a real and heavy counterpoint to, let's say, decision theory and rational choice theory and microeconomics 101. That people move into business, always take very seriously, as they should. But there should be a really kind of a strong drive towards ethics, and not shy away from calling these things ethics, and study these things in a serious way, like we also study other things in a serious way. Right? So that is the last 50 years that has not been en vogue. But we have to do that again. We have to have the courage to do that again and have conversations. That I think that is almost the most important thing. And we have to be very careful not to let, let's say, the corporate world and big tech have the last word on these very important infrastructural and public goods and common goods that we have. I mean, that is something that we, the citizens or the population, should be thinking about and should be deciding upon. And it's not something that should be, forced upon us because of some, quarterly revenue thinking or short-termism or whatever. So that is, I think, we are putting the cart before the horse, right? So it's the ethical horse that should be where it should be, and so now we are taking guidance from, as I said, profit and quarterly revenues and short-term gains, not unimportant, but they should have their proper place. It's not about eyeballs, and it's not about follows and likes. In an interesting societal political arrangement, these things come as a result of merit, or something that you have something interesting to say, not the other way around. So that is, I think, the most important lesson. The other thing is the design thinking. We should really not release into society things any longer that we haven't carefully thought about. And we can defend in terms of the underlying values, or the values that are embedded in them, and that have been carefully scrutinized in terms of long-term consequences that they may have. If there are none, that's fine. So that we shouldn't be. We should also be able to enjoy life, but yeah. So my main lesson is to give ethics its proper place. And take it very serious, as we take other things very serious.
Well, thank you very much, Professor van der Hoven, for joining us here and for underlining the need to reimagine ethics, give it its proper place, and really put it at the center in how we see innovation moving forward. This will require an enormous transition, but I do feel that the public is on your side. There's an outcry, I would say, for doing things differently. So let's start to think design and to rethink ethics. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. And good luck with your work. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.